Led Zeppelin are coming to IMAX. That's right. They're going to be coming to IMAX theaters in 2025 with a new documentary called Becoming Led Zeppelin. It's going to hit over 200 IMAX theaters worldwide on February the 7th, 2025. This is the first ever fully authorized Led Zeppelin documentary directed by Bernard McMahon, who I'm not very familiar with his work, but his name is on this documentary. And some early access screenings are going to be happening for this thing in 18 cities on February the 5th, a couple of days before the wide opening for this in IMAX theater. So tickets for that are on sale right now. But this is actually really, really cool. This is going to feature a never before heard interview with the late great drummer of Led Zeppelin, Mr. John Bonham. It's going to feature new interviews with the remaining members, the living members of Led Zeppelin: Robert Plant, John Paul Jones, and Jimmy Page. And it's going to have all that information, all that documented archival footage from Led Zeppelin that we've never seen before. And this is the first time that the story is being told in the band's own words. And like I said, the first time that this is the fully authorized story of Led Zeppelin in movie form, in documentary form. When you think about it, there's not many films like this about Led Zeppelin. When you think about a band like the Beatles, I feel like we've gotten so many documentaries about the Beatles, whether it be in depth like the Beatles anthology, which came out in the 90s, which documented their entire career from beginning to end. And then when you think about more recent things like Get Back, or the release of the original Let It Be movie, or the release of the latest Beatles 64 documentary that was produced by Martin Scorsese, we know very much about the entire Beatles story. There's not really any parts of the Beatles story that we're not really familiar with, but I can't really say I know that, or I know those things about Led Zeppelin. I obviously know the records, I know the music very, very well from over the years, but I can't say I know the entire story, or the different beats of their story throughout the years, all the stories behind the making of their record, and how they really, I know they came out of being in the New Yardbirds and how they all got together. I understand the basics of that story, but definitely not as in depth as it was, or as it is with the Beatles. So I'm very excited to learn more about Led Zeppelin and learn more about their story, and kind of see that overarching story between basically 1969, 1968, 1969 to 1980 with the death of John Bonham, and told in their own words. Again, unlike the Beatles, where it feels like Paul McCartney and Ringo have been out there for years in various different mediums, in various different forms, talking about the history of the Beatles, talking about the legacy of the Beatles. I feel like the Led Zeppelin members in general are a lot more quiet about the legacy of Led Zeppelin and their story. So very excited to see and hear the various things that they're going to be doing in this documentary. And with Led Zeppelin, they were a very important band, obviously, for hard rock and for popular modern rock back at that time. But they signaled the beginning of the 1970s and the rise of hard rock and the rise of stadium rock, along with other bands of that era like Black Sabbath and other different bands of that era. But they really were the next generation after the Beatles. The Beatles were the band of the 1960s, and I would argue that Led Zeppelin were the band of the 1970s. They really were that rock band, that really blockbuster rock band that dominated the charts and dominated rock music in 1970. Not to say there's not many great bands that came out of that era. Of course, we know there are so many great bands that defined and really documented in that era that really were such a big deal. But Zeppelin, to me, really were that big stadium, that big headline band of the 1970s. So excited to see this documentary. And when you think about it, Zeppelin and IMAX is a very good match, because IMAX has that big screen and Zeppelin obviously has that big sound. So when you combine that big sound with those big visuals, I think that's very much going to be worth the price of admission to go see a Led Zeppelin documentary in IMAX. So I'm very excited to see this, because like I said, most documentaries, even with the Beatles, we get them on streaming services like Disney Plus or Amazon or something like that. So to see a big screen documentary like this on the big screen like Led Zeppelin, I think it'll be really cool. I'm not really sure, because it's 200 theaters, I'm not really sure if it's in 70 millimeter IMAX, which is like the true IMAX format, or if it's going to be in digital IMAX. But either way, it's Led Zeppelin on the big screen in IMAX. I'm sure it's going to be really cool.